We will now reconvene, and I'll turn the microphone over to Miss Kathy.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. As you quietly get settled. So the good news is this is one of the, I don't know about you, one of the best parts of the meeting for me. So the less than good news is you're not going to get a full 4 minutes because we had some additional people sign up. However, it's not all that bad. You're going to get 3.5 minutes. Okay? And just remember, when I call your name, so I'm going to call 3 names at a time just so you know that you're up next. And when it's your turn, you're going to come right over here. I'm going to turn that microphone on for you. You're going to do your presentation. I'm going to be sitting right up over there, and I'll signal you. Sometimes you'll see me, sometimes you won't, but I'll give you a signal anyway when you've got a minute left. And then you'll hear some cute little music, and that means it's the next person's time. Okay? So 3.5 minutes each. If you have handouts, any kind of display or anything, keep them in your seat. Don't bring them to the table, only your notes. And let's just listen to each other. Okay? First 3 people in order. Ken Brown, Melinda Kirsten, and Jeff Roche. And I apologize, I don't always know how to pronounce your name correctly. You may correct me when you get up. Mr. Brown, come on up.
Thank you. Ken Brown, Western Counties Alliance. Mr. Chairman, board, and staff, appreciate the time to respond. WCA continues to support a wild horse burro program on public lands when proper management exists. Number 1, excess numbers continue to be a major problem in most areas where WHB animals now exist. Number 2, wild horse burro populations need to be managed within established appropriate management levels in order to avoid overgrazing. Number 3, coordination and communication should be increased between state and federal agencies, county officials, and private stakeholders regarding population data and monitoring. Number 4, WCA continues to support an enhanced gathering process which assists in reducing numbers in overpopulated areas. Number 5, WCA continues to not support transplanting WHB animals to areas where they do not now exist. Number 6, WCA continues to support the reintroduction of disposal facilities which are necessary to care for animals in need. Number 7, WCA continues to support the working group concept that was established by this board and staff. I think that's a good area, and I think that is very helpful. WCA does not support reducing livestock grazing AUMs to accommodate additional WHB roaming animals. Number 9, I thank the board and staff as you endeavor to make the WHB program better. A copy of my testimony has been submitted to the registration table. Thank you. Have a good day.
Great. Thank you so much. Melinda. Oh, what's the problem?
I'm here today representing the Institute of Range and American Mustang, founded by Dayton Hyde back in the mid-'80s. I'm sharing some of his words today from 1992, yet I believe they still paint a picture that's appropriate for today. The rusty steel gates look like those of 1,000 other South Dakota ranches, but these gates are different. These guard the entrance to wild horse heaven, to a home for hundreds of Mustangs captured by the federal government from overpopulated western ranges. In 1986, as I drove through Nevada, I passed a huge, crowded government contract feedlot. I saw hundreds of captured wild horses standing, well-fed but dejected, in hot, dusty holding pens. These were wild animals. They deserved better. That night, I dreamed of slipping up to the corrals at midnight, flinging open the gates, and shouting to the astonished mustangs that they were free. Impractical that vision was, but I couldn't shake the notion that I was meant to help the horses. 2 months later, I flew to Washington, D.C. with a plan in my head and an appointment to see the director of the BLM. My plan was simple. I would form a nonprofit corporation to help the horses. It would try to raise money to buy thousands of acres of prime horse range where the Mustangs could run free in huge fenced pastures, better conditions than they had known for 100 years. As it turned out, the BLM was desperate for a plan that made sense. The director was caught between a Congress tired of spending money on hay, groups demanding that the horses be slaughtered, and others like me who appreciated the role that Mustangs had played in history. To me, these game, gutsy animals with tangled manes and hooves like iron embodied freedom, the essence of the American spirit. By the time the first wild horses arrived at the Black Hills Wild Horse Sanctuary in a big aluminum cattle truck, I was a nervous wreck. I had built 8 miles of new fence around the sanctuary. But what if the horses smashed through the fence and headed straight for Wyoming? The Mustangs thundered down the unloading chute, and suddenly there were 150 of them in a corral that seemed too frail to contain their unmanageable power. I stood in the midst of them, talking quietly until they settled down, then turned them out into a training field where they could learn what fences were about. Sleeping for the next several nights on the seat of my truck, I left those horses unwatched for only a few moments. Wearing the same old clothes day after day, I drove them down to water and wandered among them until they finally accepted my presence without spooking madly away. It was a week before I finally opened the training field gate and let them rush to freedom. For one joyous moment as they charged past, I galloped along with them, running wild and free, plunging madly after them down one rocky gorge and up to the next hillside. When I finally saw them again hours later, they looked as though they had been born to that range. With more than 13,000 acres today, the sanctuary is now home to about 700 horses, the vast majority of which have a BLM Freeze brand. We are here for the horses. They have saved our land from wildfire thanks to grazing, compared to our neighbors who don't allow any grazing on their land. We use PZP with great success, although I have to confess, we do enjoy the babies that have come. We believe that they are indigenous to this land and are worthy of every effort to keep them on the range. Why are you here?
Hi, I'm Jeff Roach. I appreciate you guys. That tour you took was on part of our allotment where you see the vegetation's all gone and stuff, and those horses only have that one water there. I got a note here. You might be, this is for all the other permittees. You might be tempted to put your range con in a coyote hole, but don't believe me, it's not all his fault. I think the BLM people are hardworking, responsible people, but I think what they're up against is what they're up against keeps them from doing their job. When it comes to the range, it's not the growth, feed, or grasses or brush they're talking about. It's always, let's follow this regulation. It says this, or John Marvel's going to do this to us if we don't do that, do it this way. And that's not always what's best for the range and the wild horses, wildlife, or livestock. So I'm a little sympathetic with the BLM. They got a hard job to do, and I don't let them know that all the time. But we need to educate the people outside the western areas about the wild horse. I can honestly say that I love wild horses, wildlife, and livestock, but we have to put value back in the Spanish Mustang to save himself from himself. Utah State and I in Logan, Utah, have outlined a plan to save the Spanish Mustang to reassure his presence in the West and elsewhere, also to compensate permittees and put range improvements back to the range. Thank you. I'd like to get with this guy if I can after. Dean.
You can get in line then. Thank each of you very, very much. Next three people will be Greg Hendricks, Callie Hendricks' son, and I'm going to give this a shot. Mary Ann Olsner, or something close. Okay? Greg.
Hello, everyone. Greg Hendricks. I sit on the Northwest Sierra Front Advisory Board representing Wild Horse and Burro, but today I'm talking to you as an individual, so this is my opinion. I've had the opportunity to watch this board for 3 years now through your streaming, and I've seen the many concerns you've had in reference to the numbers. And those numbers continue to grow year to year, and we have many of the same conversations from year to year, and that, what do we do about it, right? So the bottom line from what I'm seeing is that we don't have the funds to do anything about it. So I'm going to recommend to the board that they put out a strong recommendation that the Bureau gain funding in whatever way that they can to immediately put on the ground population control, be it PZP, Gonacon, whatever method that we deem suitable, on the ground right away. Now, our planning documents are starting to be built. We know that. So we have some of the planning in place, but without the money, we're not going to be able to get on the ground things done. So the bottom line comes again to the fact that without a strong recommendation from the board to have the BLM gain the additional funding, whether it's through drought relief, whether it's through sage grouse protection of the resource, we know what will happen if we're here next year without any on-the-ground population control. We'll be looking at, instead of 75,000 horses on the ground, we'll have somewhere in the neighborhood of close to 100,000. So I recommend very strongly that recommendation be put in from the board. In addition, I also know that we're looking at a lot of research, and that takes time, and that's difficult for us because our tools are limited. But I do know that some of the tools right now that are out there can be used. I know people mention PZP. I know that there's been discussions about field spaying. I know there's been discussions about, Gonacon. I can guarantee you right now, the wild horse advocates that I've talked to are almost 100% unified against field spaying. I try to maintain an open mind toward it, but I also know that there's at least 3 litigations going right now trying to hold it up, and that includes the litigation associated with the Burns research. In addition, I've also noticed and found a letter from the Cattlemen's Association that does not support the use of field spaying. So there's some resistance to it, and I encourage the board to take that into consideration when making their recommendations this session, because I'm a little concerned that what may happen is we recommend something, and in return, they try to implement, and it ends up in court for 2 years, and we get nothing done on the ground again. So with that, again, I just wanted to reiterate, I'm very encouraged by the Northeast RAC's recommendations. I'm encouraged by all of the work that you people do, and I'm very thankful for what you do. And I know you're trying to do the best you can with the limited money that we have. But I do hope that we push harder to get the funds to make something happen this year and next year instead of 3 or 4 years from now. Thanks.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Callie Hendrickson. I am the executive director for the Douglas Creek and White River Conservation Districts out of Northwest Colorado, and also speaking on behalf of the National Association of Conservation Districts today that represent the 3,000 conservation districts across the nation and the 17,000 board members that it represents as well. The conservation districts themselves are, as you've heard before, local units of government established under the state law to carry out natural resource management programs at the local level. So as you all know and have heard for years now, my focus is the rangeland health concerns. We recognize the challenges that BLM faces with the limited holding capacity and the expenses associated with those holding those horses. We now know and have heard the $1 billion figure that got people's attention finally about the holding costs. I would challenge this board to challenge BLM to put a real figure to the rehabilitation of the land. You've talked about it a little bit today. I've been very encouraged about the earlier afternoon presentations. I'm so excited to see the conversation turning back to the rangeland health. My conversation today is very different than I had planned based on those conversations that I saw here. Please take that information that you got today and that you saw yesterday from my understanding, take it seriously to heart and provide that information directly to the secretary herself, because she doesn't get what's going on out on the ground like apparently you saw yesterday. And many of us have been seeing for years. And we've been preaching the damage that the horses are doing. As I've told you, while lots of people cry over the horses, you don't see very many people cry over the range, but there's going to be some people crying over the range and the health, just watershed health in general, if we don't do something with the excess horses. I want to draw your attention to the Senate Conference Report 92-242, which accompanies the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burro Act of '71, and it states, the principal goal of this legislation is not single-use management of areas for the benefit of wild and free-roaming horses and burros. It is the intent of the committee that the free-roaming horses and burros be specifically incorporated as a component of the multiple use plans governing the use of the public lands. However, BLM is currently heading down the path of single-use management by allowing horses to do irreparable harm. There's a threshold, folks, and I think you've seen it. Once you pass that threshold, it's not coming back. And some people think I'm awfully strong when I say it's never coming back. But the question was asked earlier, how long will it take it to come back? If we were in an irrigated pasture situation, we could manipulate that and make it come back. In a 3 to 5 inch precip zone, we can't make it come back. And I challenge BLM to put the figures together as to what they really could try to help it come back. We need to remove the excess horses without significant numbers being removed. All the fertility control and adoption conversations are moot. Thank you.
My name is Mary Ann Olsner from Reno, Nevada. And I just want to say that we're all here because of the land. It means everything to us, a livelihood for many and a heritage for all Nevadans. We love all that the West has to offer. So what do the wild horses bring to this picture? At this meeting, they appear to be the problem. The fact is that they are an important element in saving the land. The forage and grass out there is the crux of this situation and the importance of this meeting. Any farmer knows it takes good soil to have a good crop of anything. So what is happening to all the native grasses out there? Over the years, the soils have been depleted by overgrazing. What do cattle give back to the land? Actually, nothing. Their rumen digestive system uses up the nutrients. A dried up cow pie you can pick up and throw like a frisbee. Also, as cattle graze, they wrap their tongues around the grass, and often pull up the roots. The soil is left barren, dry, and depleted. The horse has a single digestive system like you and me. They are wandering grazers and bite off the tops of the grass with their sharp incisors. The seeds of the grasses pass through their digestive system. When you step on a pile of dried horse manure, it crumbles under your boot. It's full of humus. It enriches the soil, and when moisture comes, the seeds of the grasses are held with moisture to sprout. Thus, replanting these native grasses, Mother Nature is so smart. And I'd just like to add something that's not in my written here, that when the Wild Horse and Burro Act was passed in 1971, it's my recollection in reading material that there were 200,000 horses in Nevada, and the native grasses and the forage was lush. Our Native Americans had an expression for this: the grass remembers. So the horses are not really the problem. I understand the numbers are significant. I do understand this. If the land is properly shared, the benefits will extend to the sage-grouse and other wild species because the horses can help. I'm not against cattle. My family is very active in the industry. But we must appreciate science and keep an open mind to changes that are taking place.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Sorry. Thank each of you so far. And next, three people, Bob, B-A-R-B, Barb Flores. Sorry about this one. J.J. Coco Echia. What are you laughing at? Three times fast, right? Coco Echia. And John Ellison.
My name is Barb Flores. I'm from Colorado, and I've been working to protect wild horses since the late 80s. Today I'm going to address primarily the proposed gather of wild horses and removal of all wild horses from the checkerboard lands in southern Wyoming. The checkerboard lands have been quite a problem since the passage of the act, because every other mile is private land and public land, kind of like a checkerboard looks. Because the Rock Springs Grazing Association, that owns a lot of the private land in this checkerboard area, along with Anaconda, has sued the BLM for removal of the horses from all of their private land. It has come to be a mandate that they be removed from all of the checkerboard land. I've proposed a couple of possible options. One, that the checkerboard land, which is actually half public land, but is being called by the BLM as they will treat it as all private land, that be fenced off and that the horses be maintained on the public lands, and that land be given to them where they were previously to compensate for checkerboard lands that are taken away. from the HMAs. Some of the HMAs, a very tiny portion, 4% in Adobe Town is private land, and yet it impacts the management of that HMA extremely. Another possibility would be that the checkerboard, the private land and public land, and I hope I can explain this so that it can be pictured, that private land be swapped out for public land so that you have a chunk of private land and a chunk of public land that is still within the HMAs. I don't see the ranchers going for this, but I do have a problem with 24 ranchers running the wild horse program in Wyoming and jeopardizing the health of the wild horses. Something that is not in the document I'm providing you with that I do want to bring up. A few years ago at an advisory board meeting, Gary Zagatnik, who was then on the advisory board, admitted to the public that the 26,000 plus national AML, which has been divided out between the states, was a number that came from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. It was given to BLM as a number that they could tolerate for wild horses on our public range lands. This AML was not derived by on-the-ground monitoring from the ground up. It was set at a national level and is bogus.
Thank you very much, Barbara.
Thank you.
Thanks. So as JJ, there he is. As JJ comes up, I wanted to remind you that if you do have some written comments that you want to leave with us, you want to leave them at the table at the back, okay? Because the board is very, very serious about reading and considering all of your thoughts. So, JJ.
Thank you, ma'am. For the record, JJ Goycochea. I'm Nevada State Veterinarian, Deputy Administrator for Nevada Department of Agriculture. You also will receive my testimony from PLC and NCBA that I did deliver to Congress some time ago, several weeks ago. In addition to that, there will be a representative from Eureka County later that will come up and give testimony. You have a copy of a letter that I did sign as chairman of the Board of County Commissioners for Eureka County as well. What I want to touch on right now briefly, we heard a little bit earlier that you guys are having some problem, the BLM is, in their fertility control because of branding issues. I want to go on the record and say that we did not say that the BLM cannot identify their horses that they are using fertility control on. We were very clear by Nevada law that those brands cannot be applied to the shoulder or the hip. The neck is fine to have a brand identified on. We are here. We are willing to provide whatever direction you would like. We're willing to work with you on finding some way to identify the horses that you need to retreat. So please, I'd like, again, the record to reflect that we are not keeping you from doing your fertility control in that manner. You've heard several people already come up and say that it's about the resource, and it truly is about the resource. We're hearing that it may be an emergency soon. No, folks, it's an emergency today, and it will be a disaster tomorrow. Just this morning, I got a phone call. There are over 250 horses in desperate need of water today as we speak. Thankfully, we made the calls needed, and those horses did receive the care and water today, but several of them have already choked to death. Does anybody know what that spring must look like and what that surrounding range must look like? It will not come back. Those horses are not going to come back. It's an emergency today, and I encourage this board to please ask the director to declare it an emergency. And then we want to know where the funding is going to come from. We can receive emergency appropriation funding to do what needs to be done. And let's not kid ourselves. Fertility control is not going to get us out of this. We need both. We need fertility control, and we need to remove those excess horses. When we get them to the numbers where they need to be, we can put all kinds of fertility control. We can try anything you guys want to try. The state of Nevada is committed. The Department of Agriculture is committed to working with those. But we have to get to AML, because if we don't, this won't be the last time somebody comes and says there's 250 horses choking.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is John Ellison, State Assemblyman, District 33. I didn't come with any written comments, but I do have a few statements to make. Dr. Gogashia couldn't hit it any better on the head. We've got a disaster out here on the open range. And if you guys could get out there and see some of these horses, people should be arrested for the shape these horses are in. I'll give you an example. If I was a BLM range con and I went out on the range right now and I found my rancher 50% over what he's allotted, what would happen to that rancher? They would pull his permits, and if his cows were in bad a shape as these horses in, they'd be in jail. This range is in such bad shape, the water with the droughts going on, we're pushing the ranchers out. And why are we having these fires? We're reducing the fuel load, or we're creating fuel load by taking the cows off. This thing is getting worse by the day. And in Idaho, you guys are having the same problem we are. But maybe what we need to do is sterilization is not going to work. Never has, never will. You can get out there and castrate these studs, and then what are you going to do? So what you need to do is find a place to move these horses. Now, Colorado's got beautiful forage and water. Gather 200,000 of these horses and take them up there. You got to do something. If not, who's going to be responsible for the death of all these horses? You guys need to get out, not just in this area here. You need to get out by Ely and Eureka and down into some of these areas and look at these horses and look at some of these pictures. You can count every bone on these horses. And you can see the horses pushing away the elk and the cattle away from these riparian areas, which if a rancher would have done that, he would have been arrested for destruction of riparian areas. But go out there and look and see how bad this place is, and get out here and drive around Nevada. I know you guys are on a short period of time here, but you need to get out and really look and see how bad this is. With no water, no vegetation out there, I mean, this is getting to where it's critical. So either you can sit here and do nothing and let them die, or you can make the decision this board needs to make. This is critical, guys. And you need to get down there by Ely, and the horses that we seen out by Gogashia's ranch the other day was unbelievable. Back in the 70s, I used to gather horses for ranchers. We gathered them on the Diamond A Desert, and we gathered down on the Cherry Creek area. So we gathered these horses for the ranchers and moved them around. We never seen the kind of shape these horses are in that they are today. They're that bad. So either we can sit here and do nothing and you can watch them all die, or you can keep pushing them off into areas that's not going to work. You're going to have to make some hard decisions. Either you're going to have to move them out, you're going to have to get them out of here, you're going to have to do something. But what you're doing is not working. And you need to get out there and see some of these areas and how bad they are. And I thank you guys, and I thank you for your time. And I know you got some hard decisions, but we're going to have to come to the plate and make them, because these are not Mustangs. 90% of these horses out there are feral horses, and they're being turned out still today. And look at the people that are killed down on Highway 50 because the horses are going onto the highway. So you guys got a problem. So we have to address this. And I know the state's going to bring it up again this year, and I'm hoping we can address at least the feral horses down in these areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. And our next three are Bonnie, maybe Collerton, maybe, Carla Bowers, and Janet Smith. Are you Bonnie?
It's Bonnie Colwriter. That's okay. Everybody does it. The armchair advocate, Fred. Anyway, Dr. Cothran, you know, is your geneticist, and he's been your geneticist for 25 years. And his job has been to evaluate the genetic health of your horses and your burros. And the way that it's done, for those that don't know, he takes hair samples when you have a gather, and then he does the genetic analysis through looking at the DNA from the hair samples. And he has said, and I've read in your handbook, that he suggests 150 to 200 horses as a minimum, to have high variability, and that high variability translates into having long-term health and viability for the horses. So that is the parameter for the health of the horses. Now what I did is I FOIA'd Dr. Cothran's analysis from 2000 to 2016 because he only did a handful of them from 1990 to 2000. And I looked at I tried to look at the correlation between high variability, translating into continued viability, and your AMLs and your population numbers. You have 34 burro herds, but only 12 of them have been evaluated between 2000 and 2016. And of the ones that have been evaluated, 6 of them have a correlation between high variability and high AMLs and high populations. And when I talk about high AMLs, I'm talking about those actually that have the high AML at 150. And then the other 6 had low AMLs, below 100, and lower populations and low variability. I know that a population of 12 is only, a number of 12 is a very, very low sampling number. Then I went to the horse herds. You have 148 horse herds, and during that period he evaluated 113 of the horse herds. And what I found there in doing the comparisons is 49 of your horse herds had high variability and high AMLs in population. 33 of them had low AMLs, low population, and low variability. So seems to be some truth to what he says. Now, 31 of them, there wasn't a correlation. So I looked at those 31, and I saw that in 2 of the cases there was a cluster. So I think that maybe there's cross breeding between the different HMAs. And then in Idaho, what you had 4 groups that have, do I have 1 minute or no? We have four groups that have had fire. Pardon? What I want to do here is I want to recommend to the board that you consider, when you're considering. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, okay.
Hi there, Carla Bowers. It appears that no one in D.C. or on this board, except maybe Ginger, gets that the wild horses and burros are just over the extremely low AML set for them. We've gone over this many times, I know, but and they are actually allowed to be on only less than 5% of all the public lands in our nation. So I know we have a lot of them in Nevada, which is an exception, and there needs to be dealt with specifically this state. But they are not, they need to have the AMLs raised, and this board should be concentrating on that instead of sterilization and ways to get rid of these horses. The other thing I think this board should be seriously considering is you must remember that BLM has stolen 15 million original habitat acres from our wild horses and burros in the West since 1971. I would like to recommend that this board study and possibly recommend that the BLM find 15 million other acres of public land where we could put our long-term and short-term holding horses in as non-reproducing herds. We could cut the budget down to next to nothing if we did that. You could have a rotation system where you leave the HMAs with reproducing herds and don't mess with them with spaying or gonocon or any of that crap, because you're going to destroy everything in those wild herds. But if you cycle remove some of the horses, take the younger ones off for adoption, put some of the other ones on the 15 million acres repatriated lands where you have non-reproducing herds. You don't even have to have holding except for those adoption horses. I really think we need to start thinking outside the box here. And I also want to share that the American taxpayer is really being reamed with regard to what we pay for long-term and short-term holding versus what our livestock grazers are paying for the grazing rights on public land. They're paying $2.11 per AUM per month. That equates to $25 a year per cow-calf pair. We're paying $1,825 a year for short-term holding per horse, and we're paying $730 a year per horse for long-term holding. Why in the hell are the livestock grazers paying $25 a year equivalent to graze our public land, and then we go and pay $1,825 or $730 a year per horse to allow this ridiculous grazing on our public lands? Really, seriously, this needs to be addressed. We are getting reamed, the taxpayer. It is not fair. So I know people don't want to hear the numbers, and we got to get this right from the AMLs and then worry about controlling and whatnot. If we don't have genetically viable herds, then we're going to have nothing. And it'll take a couple generations for this to crash, and it'll be all on us because we let it happen. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Janet Smith from Virginia. I thank the advisory board for the opportunity to present and discuss management and preservation options for our wild horses. These comments today are being made on behalf of the American Wild Horse Preservation Campaign, a national advocacy organization with nearly 600,000 followers from across the nation. Last week, more than 6,000 of those supporters emailed this advisory board supporting the following comments. One thing that I'd like to clarify is an item that I believe Dean referenced earlier regarding the NAS study. We believe that this is not a recommendation, but rather reiterating what the BLM asked them to look for. This can be found on page 13 of that document. Tools, including PZP fertility control, already exist for BLM to address many challenges. In the short term, more intensive management of free-ranging horses and burros would be expensive. However, addressing the problem immediately with a long-term view is a more affordable option than continuing to remove horses to long-term holding facilities. On page 303, confirming BLM is not using PZP in a manner that will impact population growth. We ask that the advisory board be aware, respectful, responsive to public input, and make recommendations in their interest to fight and preserve, to continue protecting America's cherished, iconic wild horses and burros. We urge this advisory board to consider these statements and make the following recommendations to the BLM. 1, maintaining population levels with PZP fertility control. 2, abandon plans to sterilize wild horses on the range via spaying and gelding. 3, allocate additional resources across HMAs to wild horses. Increase the use of PZP fertility control to manage wild horse populations is in line with the National Academy of Sciences recommendations. AWHPC and the public at large supports the use of PZP vaccine to stabilize and, if necessary, bring the wild horse herd management levels in line with resources. PZP is reversible, non-hormonal, and has proven safe and effective for more than 2 decades of use. Excuse me. Thank you. Abandoning the sterilization program. Surgical sterilization of wild horses, specifically removing their ovaries of mares, is evasive and dangerous. Veterinarians call the BLM spaying experiments barbaric. The National Academy of Sciences warns that it is inadvisable for field setting, and even the U.S. Cattlemen's Association has opposed them on humane grounds. We urge these experimental procedures be abandoned and research funds be moved to socially acceptable contraceptive solutions. I thank you for your time and for your consideration.
I'm never prepared when you get through early. So thank each of you very much. And next we will hear from Gerald Skip Miller, Hank Vogler, and Sandra Salih. Yes, sir.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I hope some of you have read 45 Years of the Wild Horse and Burro Act. It's the long version of this. The Wild Horse and Burro Act of 1971, was spurred on by emotion and written using magical thinking to solve an imaginary problems. In 1971, there were 17,000 head of wild horses on the public lands. They were nowhere near extinction. By 1983, there were almost 50,000 wild horses on the public lands, while 48,000 had been removed since 1971. The horse runners had been doing a good job of population management prior to the Wild Horse Act in 1971. In 1976, the Wild Horse and Burro Act changed to allow helicopter gathers. By 1978, it was obvious that adoptions alone could not dispose of all excess horses. So the act was changed to allow excess horses to be destroyed. The wild horse advocates stopped excess horses from being destroyed, and the Wild Horse and Burro program has lost control of the horse and burro populations. When wild horses are called living symbols of the historic and pioneer spirit of the West, they must be referring to the wild horses from Texas, not the Great Basin. Before horses made it to the Great Basin, Texas had been supplying horses to Native Americans for over 200 years, and settlers east of the Mississippi for 70. The Wild Horse and Burro Act was amended in 1978 for a reason. With over 100,000 head of horses, the Wild Horse and Burro program today, the reason is abundantly clear. It is a real heartbreaker that wild horse advocates have brought the program to the point where 80,000 head of horses need killed. We need to use science, experience, and rational thought to bring the Wild Horse and Burro program under control. To that end, I sincerely hope the Wild Horse and Burro Advisory Board will step up to the plate and recommend that the Secretary of the Interior should follow the law and cause all excess wild, free-roaming horses and burros, both on and off the range, for which an adoption demand by qualified individuals does not exist, to be immediately destroyed in the most humane and cost-efficient manner possible. That's not a good solution, but it would fix the problem. Sending them to a slaughterhouse or something would be better. But the population has to be brought under control. It's simple. And nothing has been working. So, thank you.
My name's Hank Vogler. I represent the N4 Grazing Board. I run in the antelope herd complex south of where you guys were, south of alternate Highway 93. The Water Canyon horse experiment is on my allotments where I lamb. I winter my cows in the Antelope Valley area and sheep. I have fixed all the fences. I haul lots of water. I take care of the wild horses, but when there's so many and the water gets so dried up in the summertime that they start dying, don't be looking at me, because I've long before that, by a prescribed manner, removed my livestock, because you can't starve a profit into an animal. I've had to take my cattle and sheep 160 miles away because of the horses taking over the country. Then the halogeton takes over the ground, which is a poisonous plant to a lot of animals. It doesn't come back. Horses aren't stupid. They're not going to go say, well, stand up in the rocks. When I take my cattle out of there, they go right down into the white sage. They go eat the best. The dominant studs stay there. So when you gather them, you don't alleviate the pressure off the best feed. The horses come in from everywhere else. It becomes a vacuum. You got to keep after them. You got to quit micromanaging in Washington, D.C. There's plenty of people in the BLM that knows what to do, and they would like to protect the resource, which is the range. The other thing that nobody's brought up here, Reno is 5 times more out of water than Las Vegas, and they've already got a pipeline into my backyard. And when they start sucking that water out 24/7, 365, those springs are going to dry up. What are you going to do with your horses then? I'll be out of business too. And what little land that is private in the state of Nevada, in my county, 97% is federally owned. That 3% is going to go into recreational properties. And that whole thing is going to be splintered, and the water's going to be fenced up, just like Dolly Varden Spring. I get water out of that for my sheep and haul it across the highway, and that guy asked me if I'd fence that up for him, and I said, I don't like bullets being fired at me. So, yeah, you almost lost Dolly Varden Spring already. This is what's going to happen. The water's going to go to the cities, and everybody's going to suffer, and the range is going to be gone. And if we don't quit trying to micromanage this crap in Washington, D.C., let the BLM do their job, and get those wild horse numbers down, we're in trouble. And you want to know what the irony is of the Antelope Valley Horse Complex? The 3 people that were running there in the 70s, and the BLM said you better gather those horses or they were taking them over. They got in an argument over how they were going to split them up. There were no Mustangs out there. Those people owned those horses. And the only reason there is an antelope herd management area is because of that. They couldn't decide on how to divide the horses. And they've been scattered further and further and further and further. And so you have a herd management area, and you wind up having twice as many horses over there. And when you cross district lines, you can't get anybody to agree on lunch. They're supposed to be all in the same hymn book, and they're not. And so they gather White Pine County, they don't gather Elko County. So the horses move across the street, tear the fences down, and guess who fixes them for that $2.11? You want to know how much I spend a year? I'll show you how much it costs to run on public land. And you guys got a bigger problem, and I feel sorry for you, the BLM, but if we're going to micromanage everything from Washington, D.C. with advocacy groups, then we may as well close the BLM down, pack our tack, and go home. Thank you.
Okay, well, I just need to take a deep breath here. Okay, I'm Sandra Sell-Lee. I'm Director of Volunteer Programs at the Cloud Foundation. I've been attached to them for about 3 years. I have a 40-year corporate background in management development, organization development, large-scale systems change. First of all, I want to start out, Dean, by giving you a public acknowledgement and a thank you. You were the inspiration at the last August board meeting. I sat at home and watched the live stream for a day and a half and took notes and heard Dean say, I don't know how many times, we need to figure out how to work with the communities and the volunteers in the communities. Well, I got all energized and excited because I know how to do that. I did that for 40 years in a corporate environment. Same process of change.
So I got busy and worked with a whole bunch of subject matter experts. We've compiled a field guide for volunteers. It's the contributors are volunteers, and it's the audience is volunteers, and it's everything you ever wanted to know about managing a wild horse or burro herd on the range. I'm not dealing with the off-range. I'm strictly focused on the future and on range. Okay, I know how to do that. I don't know how to do these other. That's your job. That's why you get the big bucks. So with the inspiration from Dean about trying to figure out how to unleash and capture the resources, it drives directly, Kristen, to the budget issues in my mind. PZP, fertility control programs for 55,000 horses, approximately 27,000 mares or 22,000 that are out there fertile right now, is an intensive, labor-intensive, boots-on-the-ground activity. That we're not going to live long enough to give Dean enough staff and the BLM enough staff to have enough wild horse and burro specialists to manage the manpower, person power that's required to do that. But we've got volunteers. We have volunteers who are competent, who are eager, who are experienced, and we need to find a way to engage them, to educate them, to enable them, and when I talk about enabling, I mean giving them tools and resources like training, like education, and then beginning to empower the local BLM field managers at each herd site. And I guess my closing comment, based on the information Bonnie shared earlier on the correlation, I think I would recommend that as we go forward tomorrow to implement PZP on all the HMA herds, that we sort out the ones that are 150 or 200 in size, that have the genetic variability, that have the high numbers, and work at priority of keeping them stable, and slowly work our way through the rest of the HMAs, but for sure, as quickly as we can, energize each of those herds to begin the PZP now. Stop it where it is. It's not. It doesn't solve your problems, but for heaven's sakes, we know how not to make it worse. Thank you.
So again, thank each of you. I'm not sure who this next guy is, but it says Boyd Spratling, DVM, and then Keith Norris and Teresa Griffin.
I've wanted to see a Wild Horse and Burro Advisory Board meeting in Elko for 10 years now, or 12. But welcome to Ground Zero. You guys saw it yesterday. And we talk about costs. You know, we can look at the costs of holding. It's in the pie chart. It's in the budget. And we know exactly what those costs are, the cost of gathers, the cost of feed, everything. But the costs that we cannot calculate, we can't even imagine the cost to the resource. We can calculate what it might cost, and Dean mentioned we can calculate what it might cost to rehab a deteriorated rangeland. But what is the cost of having it fall through a threshold that it cannot recover from? And so when we start altering plant communities, we start displacing wildlife, and we start having erosion, increased flash flooding when we do get rains because we don't have the forage base to hold that water back, which we see in the state of Nevada. Those things occur and will occur with increasing frequency with what we have going on out there now. You saw it, you know, in that valley out there in Antelope. You know, that's what's happening, and you're not seeing it at its worst. You know, this can go on through, water is the main thing right now. And these costs, we cannot imagine the cost to our future generations of losing an entire watershed or an entire habitat. That's something we cannot even think about calculating, especially if we cannot turn it around and if they pass through that threshold that Callie talked about. A couple things, I've had to change my presentation just a little bit. As far as genetic variability, that can be solved very easily. Put 1 or 2 new studs on occasion into those herds of 100 or less than 150, and you will guarantee your genetic variability. I'm a good friend of Gary Zakotnik from Eden, Wyoming, and I know him very well, and he categorically would not have said that the nationwide AML was set by the by the National Cattlemen's and Beef Association. That's something that is determined at the district level by BLM personnel and staff, based on the forage and the capabilities of that particular resource. And lastly, I'm going to step right out for the Nevada Cattlemen's Association, and if there's any misunderstanding as to our support for any manipulation, any safe manipulation, to reduce population growth, whether it be immunosuppressants, therapeutics, surgery, we support them all. So any and all of the above. Thank you for coming, and we appreciate having you here.
Good afternoon. Good to see you all again. My name is Keith Norris. I'm the Director of Government Affairs and Partnerships for the Wildlife Society, which is a professional scientific organization of wildlife biologists dedicated to science-based management and conservation of our native wildlife. Through that position as the Director of Government Affairs at TWS, I chair the National Horse and Burro Rangeland Management Coalition. That is a diverse and growing coalition of 16-plus national organizations and additional local organizations that span from wildlife, livestock, sportsmen's, and land conservation organizations. Typically, I use this time at the advisory board meetings to talk about the numbers of horses, the growth rates of horses, and how those numbers are impacting our public rangeland ecosystems and native wildlife. But I know that you all know these facts, and I don't see much point in reiterating them to you today. And I know that you also had firsthand experience yesterday during your rangeland tour and seeing what those consequences are of overpopulated horses and burros. Additionally, I have provided copies of my written testimony, both from the Wildlife Society and the Coalition, to you that elaborate much further on those rangeland impacts. So I want to talk today about why the Wildlife Society is so interested in this topic and why we pay to be a part of this coalition and why we dedicate my time and resources to this coalition. Wildlife Society is, as I said, a science-based professional organization. And so we care about this issue because we see it as a complete breakdown of science-based management. We know rangeland ecology. We know the ecology of horses. We establish our management objectives based on our understanding of how horse populations relate to other uses of the range and our understanding of how the horses can impact the range when they exceed certain population levels. And yet, despite all of that, despite setting those management objectives with that science-based information, we continue to implement management actions, namely limited gathers, limited amounts of fertility control and adoption programs that we know for a fact, through scientific evaluation, have absolutely no hope of actually achieving our management objectives. And so I certainly know that the BLM is limited and constrained by various policies and resource availabilities, namely financial resources, and Alan elaborated on that earlier today. But I want to point out that your recommendations are not. And part of your job as the advisory board is to make sure that the BLM is pushing forward and is addressing those challenges, addressing those limitations, and that you're providing recommendations to the secretary to inform those policy changes that help ensure the survivability of this program and the survivability of our rangeland ecosystems. And so I challenge you today to use your power and responsibility as the advisory board to address the Secretary of Interior and Agriculture directly to correct this failing approach in their management. I urge you to engage those secretaries, whether that be through a letter or a meeting, to ensure that they know we must prioritize the health of the rangelands, that horse and burro populations are continuing to grow, are already exceeding ecologically based management objectives, and that they threaten the health of those rangelands. And let them know that we must implement science-based management decisions that will meet our management objectives. Encourage them to engage Congress to address those policy barriers and resource limitations so that we can improve our management of this natural resource. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Teresa Griffin. I am with the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, and my comments today are reflecting the opinion from our governor's office in the state of Utah. The state of Utah is a sovereign entity with responsibility for managing water, wildlife, domestic wildlife within its boundaries. The state of Utah represents a wide range of citizens, including our landowners, sportsmen, livestock, and recreational users of private and public lands within the state. BLM's failure to remove excess horses in Utah has left Utah with nearly 3 times as many horses as should be on their lands. And the BLM does have a statutory duty to consult the state of Utah regarding management on this issue. These current levels of wild horses and burros on the rangelands are not ecologically sustainable and have damaged the state's water and wildlife resources and habitats, and impaired the state's ability to fulfill its responsibilities to manage the water, wildlife, and domestic livestock industries. By continuing to allow the horses and burros to exceed sustainable levels, the BLM is placing in jeopardy the future of wildlife, our healthy rangelands, and livestock operations in Utah, not to mention harming the long-term survival of these horses and burros themselves. The BLM has an obligation to identify when the HMAs that are overpopulated with excess horses and remove the excess horses from the land. And the BLM cannot, and should not continually just rely on the lack of funding to justify the inaction on this issue. Although the number of horses and burros on the range has nearly doubled since 2012, the BLM itself has only requested a 7% increase in funding to manage the wild horses and burros over that same time period. The state of Utah recommends that the advisory board urge the BLM to manage wild horse and burros at the minimum AMLs in all 20 herd management areas in the state of Utah. The BLM should fulfill its statutory responsibilities by removing, at a minimum, 3,884 excess horses in all HMAs in Utah to return the horse and burro populations to the HMAs to the appropriate AMLs. Further, the state urges the board to recommend the BLM remove at a minimum an additional 500 horses throughout the state to ensure we have a thriving ecological balance in our landscapes on our state's rangelands. The state of Utah also requests that the advisory board encourage the BLM to identify the costs and request those necessary funds in their next annual budget to address the removal of these excess horses and burros in Utah and throughout the West. Without the increase in the rate of removal of horses and burros in Utah, the wild horse and burro population in the state and throughout the West will continue to expand, thus harming our livestock producers, our wildlife, our healthy rangelands, our wildlife habitats, and our water resources. The state of Utah will submit a letter to you, and that letter will reflect and support the comments that are made today. Thank you very much.
And thank each of you very much. And our next 3 commenters include Dr. Gerald Huff, Betsy McFarland, and Tom Barnes.
Does it 3.5 minutes start when I get up?
No, when you're perfectly settled and you look like you're ready to start, that's when it starts.
It's a bit of a challenge to solve all of your problems in 3.5 minutes, but I am going to give it my best shot. I'm a veterinarian, equine practitioner from Las Vegas, Nevada. I was raised in Delta, Utah, the heart of Mustang country. Let's cut to the heart of the chase. We need to find the funding to remove excess horses in as much as is possible. When we are removing those horses, we need to geld all of the stallions that we can lay our hands on at that same time. The best fertility control is the removal of semen donors. And we should make every attempt to get our horse populations to a 0 population growth. Castrating stallions is the optimum form. we can return to those bands the following year and geld those young stallions that have been produced during that year and those renegade stallions that have moved into those bands. And over a period of a few years, we can get the reproductive rates down to where we have manageable levels in these herds, numbers that are acceptable to both horse enthusiasts and cattlemen, the users of the range. As Dr. Spratling so eloquently put it, if you're concerned about genetic pooling, once those numbers are reached, we can reintroduce stallions into select situations where those populations can be maintained and monitored and managed. We have nibbled around the edges of the population quagmire for the entire course of the so-called wild horse and burro issue. These are feral animals. They have to be managed like any other livestock. I'm the ultimate horse lover. I've spent my entire career caring for them and caring about them. We do them no service by allowing them to starve to death, die of thirst, go through the trauma of being gathered, hauled, and then penned up for life in a corral where they spend the rest of their time swatting at flies. I might make one other suggestion. There is an additional bit of technology on the horizon. We have a viral vectored GnRH vaccine, which is has shown to be successful in neutering both male and female laboratory animals and cats. It shows every evidence of being successful in horses as well. It would be a very easy task to do a trial on that particular piece of technology in some already gathered adolescent horses. Its efficacy is particularly in prepubescent animals. That could be done quickly, easily in horses that have already been gathered, monitored over the next year or two, and would then make the whole fertility situation much more manageable in our hands. I appreciate your kind attention. If there is any way that I can be of any value to you in your attempts to rectify this situation, I'm at your service.
Good afternoon. My name is Betsy McFarland. I'm the Executive Director of the Eastern Nevada Landscape Coalition. We're a small nonprofit established in Ely, Nevada. We were established 15 years ago to facilitate landscape scale restoration across land boundaries such as BLM to Forest Service, private to state lands. Our mission is to restore the dynamic and diverse, resilient landscapes of the arid and semi-arid West for present and future generations through education, research, advocacy, partnerships, and the implementation of on-the-ground projects. We envision a future where the ecosystems of the arid and semi-arid West thrive. Functioning, diverse ecosystems will be the result of restoration achieved and maintained with naturally occurring disturbances such as fire, in combination with other management prescriptions, including traditional uses. To this end, we are extremely concerned about the negative impacts the current excessive numbers of wild horses and burros are having on riparian areas and sage-grouse habitat. With the majority of the herd management areas in Nevada currently exceeding appropriate management level by 1 to 2 to 3 times, we believe we are rapidly approaching a threshold, if we haven't already crossed that, where we may lose the native sage steppe landscapes. If we lose these native landscapes, it will have a drastic impact on the sage-grouse and other sagebrush obligate species such as the pygmy rabbit. Nevada and much of the West is struggling to prevent the listing of the sage-grouse as an endangered species, and the loss of their habitat as a result of excessive numbers of wild horses is unacceptable. With the current horse populations, it is not unusual to see large numbers of horses showing up outside the herd management areas throughout Nevada. Therefore, it is no longer just the herd management areas that are being negatively impacted. The wildlife are being driven from water sources, and livestock producers are being forced to reduce their grazing season or herd numbers. Or, as you guys heard this morning, some of them haven't used certain areas in years. ENLC and many of our affiliates are increasingly reluctant to work on landscape restoration projects if they fall within a herd management area because of potential for project failure due to excessive horse numbers. These restoration projects range from removal of pinyon juniper from sage steppe communities to wildfire restoration. We also spend considerable amount of time on noxious weed control and invasive species control, vegetative invasive species. We urge the advisory board to work with Congress to untie the BLM's hands and allow the BLM to exercise sale authority in order to move excessive horses off the rangelands and get the populations down below AML. The current birth control program is a tool, but in order for it to work properly, the herd management areas need to be at or below AML. Starting this birth control program with HMA's current high populations destines the program to fail because the horses will destroy their habitat before they are actually down to appropriate numbers that can be supported by the resources. If this happens, not only do the horses lose out, but so do the wildlife, other users, and the ecosystem as a whole. Thank you for this opportunity to comment, and my comments have been submitted at the back table.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Tom Barnes. I'm from Elko County. I am a cattle producer, a horse producer, and a sportsman. I also serve as the first vice president for the Nevada Cattlemen. I believe the board has a letter from the cattlemen regarding our position on sterilization. The increased number of horses on the rangelands is becoming an insurmountable problem. We need to get the horse numbers down to appropriate management levels for many reasons. Range degradation is one that I think is very important. The health of horses and wildlife depend on healthy rangeland. Range will flourish under properly managed grazing systems. With the high number of mustangs roaming our rangelands, we are seeing abusive grazing by horses as they are on the same range year-long, year after year. With certain soil types, this will cause trampling damage. Bunchgrass range communities are not tolerant to heavy and abusive grazing. In these cases, these ecological sites will transition to lower quality forage sites, allowing invasion of early annual grasses and low sagebrush. From this stage, if nothing is done to correct the conditions, the site will transition to bare ground interspaces where understory grasses are sparse. At this stage, grazing cannot be managed to improve range health. These unhealthy rangelands provide nothing for horses or wildlife. This is the path the current management of wild horses is headed down. Wildlife will suffer dramatically, as well as overall horse health. I think we can all agree that sick, undernourished animals are not something we want to have. It is selfish and cruel to allow these animals to suffer and starve. The explosion of the wild horse population has occurred because of sentiment, and the horse has become the victim of those who want to help him. Domestic livestock are managed for herd and range health. Wildlife is managed for herd and range health. Where is horse management? True resolution to this problem may be painful in the short term, but something must be done to ensure long-term sustainability of our rangelands for all who depend upon them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to have Megan Dixon, Wild Burro. Not sure if I got that one right. You can correct me when you get up here, Wild. And Julie Hughes.
Hey there, everyone. My name is Megan Dixon. I also go by the name Wild Mustang Megan. Horses saved my life, so now I dedicate my life to help save them. You see, I have a very misunderstood disability that is invisible. It is characterized by inability to understand how to interact socially. This makes it almost impossible to make and keep friends. It also made me a target for my bullies. The name of this disability is a autism spectrum disorder known as Asperger's syndrome. Often I'm asked how it feels to have Asperger's syndrome. It feels like I'm in a huge pool of water. Everyone above me is laughing, swimming, and playing in the water. I am underneath the water, struggling with all my might to reach to the top. Most people choose not to see me or help. Others try to help but become discouraged because it was too hard to reach me. Some prefer to laugh and make jokes or even push me back down as I'm just about to reach the top. No matter what I try, I can't reach the top. I just want to reach the top. I try with all my might, however I fail. I soon fell into a deep depression and I thought about ending my life. When the pressure and bullying escalated, I started to self-harm. Being thrown into an unknown world with strangers unwilling to understand me was terrifying. The mental and physical abuse became too much and led to post-traumatic stress disorder. So at the age of 15, the doctors removed me from the school system. The reason why I am here today is because my dad had gotten me a rescue horse that was saved from going to Mexico to slaughter. He was a horse that had been through very tremendous amounts of abuse, and he took me to meet this horse. And as soon as I looked into the eyes of this horse, I could see and feel the healing hands of God. And this horse led me on this fight. And it is now my mission to do all I can to educate others on the plight of the wild horses and to stop the slaughter of all of our equines. I really suggest my friend's solution that is called Reserve Design by my good friend Craig C. Downer. He is a wildlife ecologist, and we really need to give this a chance because I believe right now that this is the answer. We need to promote reserve design, and we need to get this out there. The PZP, the sterilization, they are not the answer, and I don't believe it's in the horse's best interest. Thank you, and God bless. Thank you.
My name is Wildy Bruff, and I live in Wells, Nevada. I'm better known sometimes as Wild Burro. You guys have a hard job ahead of you. All I have is my opinion, I guess. I don't have a lot of statistics and stuff. But since you've put the wild horse on the welfare roll, he's lost his freedom anyway. And you can equate it to maybe some indigenous people that we have in this country. And I think, I was in Carson City in 1971 when Wild Horse Annie was there. And I don't think that this is what she was shooting for. I don't think this is even anything close to it. The people that want to, or that are saying that they want to save the horse, in my opinion, they are not. They are the worst thing that could have happened to that wild horse. And I call them wild horses because that's what they are. They're not Mustangs. anybody that thinks they are, they're crazy. They're wild horses. Those horses were run and used and predecessors to a lot of saddle horses and work horses. And now they're interbred and some of them have some pretty tough genetics. If those folks that want to save those horses would put up and come up with some money and buy a ranch and put them horses on, but it seems like all they want to do is get into the government pockets. I don't understand that. Everybody got all these people and they want to save the horse, but they don't have any solution to it. All you want to do is starve them to death. Put them out in some middle of Nevada where there's nothing to eat anyway and watch them starve to death and call them Mustangs. That just is, in my opinion, idiotic. Actually, and the main reason I came today, but you need to do something with them horses. I had a dream the other night, and I had this thundering herd running by me, and I woke up and they were running into this lush alfalfa field, and it looked like heaven, animal heaven, and I realized that my need in life is to save the wild and noble ground squirrel. And I've come here today to ask you guys if you could share a little bit of your money with me for that ground squirrel. Thank you, ma'am.
Oop, easy there. So I think I misspoke, and Julie Hughes actually did not sign up to speak unless you're here, Julie, and do. Yes, you would like to? Okay. Get this off.
I wasn't expecting to be back up here, but I'm going to burn your ears a little bit more. As you saw me earlier, I'm the vice chair for the Northeastern Nevada Great Basin RAC. But on my own personal opinion, I'm a horsewoman, I'm a sportsman, I'm an avid outdoorsman. I spend a lot of time outside. And first of all, I just need to reiterate, I'm going to reiterate what's already been said probably a dozen times. But additionally, no one wants the horses completely removed. We just need them down to AML. We need to do what's best for the resources for all that use this land, whether it be wildlife, grazing, whoever it is out there. We need to bring it down to AML for that reason. If the land only has habitat to support 10 animals, it's not just 2 or 3 that are going to starve, it's all of them. Whether it be horses, elk, deer, cattle, they're all going to starve. They may not starve to death, but they're going to starve. They're not going to be healthy. Ultimately, and I'll finalize it with this, we need to remove protection of the horses, and we need to start conservation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next 3 commenters are Jake Tibbetts, make sure I'm doing this right, Maggie Orr, and Sheila Schwaddle.
Good evening. I'm Jake Tibbetts. I'm the Natural Resource Manager for Eureka County, Nevada. There's a letter that's been provided to each of you, both through the email as well as physically here today. You're copied on there as one of the CCs on the letter. That is from the Eureka County Board of Commissioners. But I would like to step through some of the main points that are of concern to Eureka County. What you saw yesterday on your tour is the rule more than the exception in Nevada. You could block out the next 30 days, and I could take you every day to somewhere else that looks that bad or worse. There truly are emergency conditions in this state because of the overpopulation of wild horses. We hear a lot of acknowledgement of these issues at these meetings by BLM, but there's never been a formal acknowledgement of that. We believe that there needs to be through this board a recommendation for formal acknowledgement of emergency conditions, an emergency declaration, to allow that then to move forward to gather the appropriate resources to tackle this issue head on. The letter we provided to you also goes through and specifically highlights herd management areas within or affecting Eureka County. Many of the herds in Eureka County have expanded well out of their HMAs. They're on private lands. We've informed BLM multiple times about this issue and have not found any resolution of this. One of the complexes that we highlight in that letter is the Diamond Complex. We heard earlier the conversations about the positive movements towards these working groups, coordinated resource management, and bringing diverse stakeholders to the table. I do want to point out that the AMLs and the Diamond Complex were set through a coordinated resource management type process through working groups. There were wild horse advocacy groups involved in that, the Nevada Department of Wildlife, the BLM, the private stakeholders. Anybody that wanted a seat had a seat at the table. The ranchers in that situation, every one of them took a reduction in grazing numbers for their new allocation. And that came out in the early 2000s. That also set the AMLs for the Diamond Complex. The only entity that came to the table that has not been able to uphold their part of the coordinated resource management plan that developed that process has been the BLM. Every rancher is running reduced numbers even from what they're allocated, and that was through one of these working group processes. So that works when everybody that comes to the table holds up their end of the bargain, and it has not been done. We stepped through all the HMAs in Eureka County. I would please take a look at that and look at that individual HMA issues. The last thing I want to talk about here is the BLM running afoul of state laws, particularly related to water law in the state of Nevada and the brand laws. But I want to focus on the water law. There's water hauling taking place even right now as you sit here. There's water sources that are being controlled by BLM where there is no legal water right held for those uses. And we would ask you to take a look at that. And again, please look at the letter and the specific recommendations there. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Maggie Orr, representing Lincoln County Conservation District, Nevada Association of Conservation Districts, and the Nevada Conservation Commission. Conservation districts came out of the tragedy of the Dust Bowl. They are entities of state government governed by locally elected residents and founded on the philosophy that conservation decisions should be made at the local level. In Nevada, where the federal government owns 85%, CDs serve a vital role to connect public and private interests to pursue proper management of rangeland resources. The Nevada Conservation Commission and Nevada Association of Conservation Districts supports these following statements. It is essential that wild horse and burro numbers be kept at or below AML. All established solutions to excess numbers must be allowed and followed: adoption, sale, sterilization, and humane euthanasia. Long-term holding is not a solution, but a misuse of public funds. The 1971 Wild Horse and Burro Act should be enforced as enacted. The Lincoln County Conservation District sees unacceptable habitat degradation caused by wild horses on lands in Lincoln County and have tried to involve ourselves in solutions to specific problems in our area. In May of 2015, we requested our BLM RAC strongly advise the Ely BLM District to complete Management Action 5 from the 2008 Ely Resource Management Plan, which states, remove wild horses and drop herd management area status for those areas that do not provide sufficient habitat resources to sustain healthy populations, as listed in Table 13. Table 13 of the RMP lists 16 herd management areas dropped for a total of over 1.8 million acres. A 2013 census listed 1,090 horses in these dropped HMAs. The 2016 census found 1,952 horses, almost double the earlier number in less than 5 years. Not attaining zero AML in these HMAs violates the contractual agreement with the American people committed to through the public planning process and record of decision of the Ely RMP. Many CDs in Nevada are currently working hard on greater sage grouse habitat improvement projects. In 2016, Lincoln County CD planned and provided a nexus for funding, melding over $80,000 from 3 state agencies, the U.S. Forest Service, the CD itself, and a local wildlife group to remove pinyon juniper from an important wildlife corridor area. The results of these projects are always in jeopardy from overuse by horse numbers exponentially over AML. I have looked at previous minutes of your meetings. Mr. Harvey stated the letters that are of real value are those with positive suggestions and/or solutions rather than just pointing out problems. Dr. McDonald wanted to encourage BLM to keep its eye on the goal of supporting horses on the range with minimal interference. I wish those statements could be true and applied, but it is hard to be positive in the face of such a difficult situation with only one real solution. Get to AML by all means allowed in the 1971 Act, including sales without limitations. Here in Nevada, you are at the epicenter of the wild horse and burro problem. I serve on boards like you to try and make a difference. I cannot ignore what can be observed by anyone who goes to look at Nevada's rangelands where wild horses and burros are present. I said at the beginning that CDs came out of the tragedy of the Dust Bowl. Conservation districts stand ready today to assist with overcoming the tragedy of our rangelands where wild horse and burro numbers are above AML. We cannot come to solutions until we deal with the problem. I would ask that you please tell the Secretary of Interior and Congress what you saw on your tour and what you heard earlier today from the Nevada BLM people. And I did submit comments in the back. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Sheila Schwadell, Pine Nut Wild Horse Advocates. We're a volunteer group for BLM doing fertility control in the Pine Nut HMA with PZP. I'd like to recommend that you reverse your prior recommendation that the BLM research the spaying and gelding of wild horses. Contrary to what the other veterinarian said, all of the equine practitioners in the Carson Valley think it's ludicrous to spay mares out in the field. We also would like to urge that BLM implement large-scale PZP programs utilizing remote darting like we do, bait and water trapping, and helicopters as a last resort and only when keeping the horse's social structures intact at all times. This can be done with improved humane standards, including eliminating the per head fee for each horse that is brought in and instead move to a daily helicopter contractor rate, which might save you money also. BLM has told us that PZP can't be implemented on a large scale. We think that is not true. In fact, the only thing that stops BLM from implementing the large-scale PZP programs is the BLM. So if BLM doesn't understand how to implement this, ask the advocates. We're happy to help you to make it a success on the range. We also hope that the advisory board can steer the BLM in the right direction, but please start by withdrawing your support for the spaying and gelding of the horses. And then recommend a large-scale PZP program that can work with the advocacy groups to ensure humane treatment and success. Along those lines, they also might think about compensating ranchers who want to voluntarily retire their grazing permits and give the AUMs to horses. Compensation would come in forms of monetary payments, as obvious. And one last note, Dean alluded to the mention of additional lands being added to HMAs. I would like him and the advisory board to please recommend the repatriation of pine nut HA lands back to HMA status in the upcoming RMP. Things have changed out there. The current major landowners are not opposed to that. Neither are the tribal allotment landholders. And that's a way to increase AML, which I know is a no-no today, but in an area which is sustaining horses healthily, in a healthy fashion. It will allow BLM to have more horses on the land, save them money in the long term, and it's a win-win for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our next three speakers are Bevan Lister, Kim Earhart, I'll get this right now, and Marie Milliman.
Thank you, committee members. For the record, my name is Bevan Lister. I am Vice President of Nevada Farm Bureau Federation, and I sit on the Federal Lands Issue Advisory Council for American Farm Bureau Federation. Where to start? Nevada Farm Bureau would like to say thank you for coming to Elko to hold this meeting. Given the degree to which Nevada's rangelands are severely impacted by the overpopulation of wild horses, we think it's warranted that you come to see us. Thank you. Nevada Farm Bureau policy, developed by our members and adopted through our annual policy process, has called for proper management by the federal agencies in many ways. We believe that it is essential that the number of wild horses and burros be kept at or below AML on a statewide level and in each herd management area. Our policy also encouraged the actions that we have taken in conjunction with Nevada Association of Counties to seek legal action for the failure of the federal agencies to follow the Federal Wild Horse and Burro Act. We support the proposal for the state of Nevada to enter into legal actions. It is extremely frustrating that the agencies have no problem in requiring others to follow the regulations, but aren't held accountable for their actions. Other multiple users of federal lands will also carry on the extra burden for the conservation of the sage grouse. We are told that this will apply to the wild horses and burros. But frankly, given the track record of federal agencies following their requirements when it comes to wild horses and burros, we remain skeptical. At this point, it is unknown what positive solutions can be brought forward. You've heard the facts. You've been on the ground and seen what's really happening. The BLM is giving you the science. You know where the true position is. You've also heard a lot of emotional rhetoric about all of the wonders that those that sit in a city cubicle can fantasize about what the wonderful wild horse is. A feral animal that admittedly the ranching community was managing very well for well over 100 years, to the point that when the Wild Horse and Burro Act was passed in 1971, there were 17,000 of them on the range in the state of Nevada. And it didn't cost the BLM or the public a penny. How many millions of dollars have been spent since then? How many horses have been gathered and against the law relocated and transferred, and now in this current situation starved to death or thirsting to death? It's kind of hard for somebody simple like me to get my face around it. Nevada Farm Bureau supports a healthy, thriving wild horse population, but we need sound resource management. Thank you very much.
Afternoon, Board. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Kim Earhart from Pennsylvania. I am deeply concerned about the uncertain future of the wild horses and burros of America. I am a 30-year public servant as a letter carrier with the U.S. Postal Service, formerly known as the Pony Express. As I continue to learn and understand the challenges and concerns relating to wild horses and burros, borough management on the HMAs and other open range lands, two main concerns have emerged. Number one, that the humane BLM policies always be given precedence in implementation over immediate quick fixes such as helicopter gathers and wild mare sterilization experiments. Overpopulation numbers in Nevada is not a new problem, nor did it happen suddenly as if overnight, but is a result of allowing a problem to slowly unbalance out of control. We allowed this. The horses are paying the price, but we allowed this. And together, we must fix it. We are strong together, and we can do this. Some wise and well thought out suggestions have been offered here today. This is a multifaceted problem, and it must have a multifaceted and enforced solution. Number two, that the BLM budget maximum funds to a heavy PZP Gonacon campaign. Make use of Nevada's limited water resources on HMAs and in general. If darters are constantly manning water sources, the horses will be naturally forced to come to the water and the darters. Then vaccinate, vaccinate, vaccinate. Zero birth equals eventual long-term sustainable AMLs and healthier range. As the number of births is decreased or prevented, the AMLs will head in the correct direction. Eventually, as the HMA range improves, the wild horses and burros may not be singled out as the only villain, range villain, and other factors will be exposed. And I also wanted to, if I have time, since I've been here in Elko, I've driven over 600 miles, all the way down 228, all the way down through the Ruby Mountains, all the way down to Eureka, all the way across 50 to Ely, all the way up 93 to Wells. I've encountered from the road only small bands, 4 small bands, of 7 to 8 adults. I observed one with a definite stallion, typically 1 or 2 foals. They looked amazing. I know what a horse looks like. And the range condition, I saw no animals on range, and it looked the same as what we saw yesterday.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm a little nervous, so if my voice gets kind of weird, I'm going to talk fast because I have so much that I'd like to go through. But just on my initial statement, I strongly am opposed to any experimentation or use of field sterilization. The proposed surgical procedures will not be conducted in a sterile environment. Appropriate follow-up care would not be possible on the range or in any holding facility. I vehemently oppose the use of permanent sterilization on the range. These procedures are costly and labor-intensive and are unnecessary if PZP is used as recommended by the 2013 NAS report. As an intermediary compromise until all such scientific data is accumulated and reviewed, not only as mentioned here today, this proposed fertility control will continue to be challenged in court and become a waste of the advocates' and taxpayers' dollars in defense of it. Those monies could be utilized towards the PZP applications as opposed to defending in court as far as some sort of a sterilization process. Per the NAS, management practices are facilitating high rates of population growth. Thus, population growth rate could be increased by removals through compensatory population growth from decreased competition for forage. As a result, the number of animals processed through holding facilities is probably increased by the management of the horses. That's in the 2013 NAS report, pages 5 and 6. As the lack of scientific research clearly exists throughout the BLM management system, please accept moving forward in my recommendations that any reference to the BLMs or DOIs, AMLs is opposed and duly challenged. Using science to improve the BLM Wild Horse and Burro Program findings, pages 10 and 11, the Wild Horse and Burro Management's handbook lacks the specificity necessary to guide managers adequately in establishing and adjusting appropriate management levels. The handbook does not clarify the vague legal definitions relating to implementing and assessing management strategies for free-ranging equids. How AMLs are established, monitored, and adjusted is not transparent to stakeholders, supported scientific information, or amenable to adaptation with new information and environmental and social change. So that's a report that came out in 2013, and I'm not trying to be accusatory, and maybe there's been some progress in that area, I don't know. I recommend that the BLM adopt an immediate standoff of any wild horse or burro removals based off of, and for similar evaluations on a minimum of a 5-year basis moving forward, and for justification of any horse or burro removals. An emergency protocol should be established and utilize the body condition scoring as per the NRC for horses as a priority for any of the removals initially. NAS and NRC state on one HMA in another state, the AML was set after an intensive 5-year monitoring program. Data that were used included actual use, range condition and trends, utilization, precipitation, range sites, observations. I'm not going to continue to read that, but basically based on scientific information. Based upon these scientific determinations, I recommend that for the health of our entire ecological system and the BLM's responsibility to the citizens of the United States of America, any grazing permit issuance or removal of wild horse and burros should be seriously reviewed, justified, and modified accordingly.
Thank
That-
you very much. Appreciate it. Debbie, you're going to tell me if we have one more person. The remaining individuals that I have on my list are, and we'll go in this order: Craig Downer, Tammy Pearson, and Ramona Morrison. Is there one more? That's it. Okay.
Okay, I was on the tour yesterday. My name's Craig Downer, and I sure appreciated that. And being able to give a few comments that the board allowed me to be there. I would like to say that I think one thing is being overlooked, and that's the water tables and how they influence the ecosystem. And there are many areas throughout the West where the water tables are greatly drawn down by ranchers and golf courses and mining companies. And I've flown quite a few of these herd areas on behalf of the wild horses as a wild horse advocate, and I notice how dry and parched they often look. And then yet you can see a ranch with big pools and lush pastures and alfalfa fields or neighboring towns. So I think you can actually set up these habitats, these little islands of habitat for failure, and that would be for all the wildlife species. And so anyway, my testimony, I just wanted to make sure you got that in about water tables. That should not be overlooked, and especially if the horses are set up in that way and set up for failure. So sincere greetings to all the advisory board and those present. I'm still a faithful believer in fulfilling the noble and true core intent of the Wild Free-Roaming Horses and Burros Act, and I implore each of you to seriously weigh the following. We live in a world today that is being rampantly, often mindlessly overrun by our own species and our machine and chemical altered ecosystems. Present population rates have increased point to 9 or 10 billion people by mid-century. In our increasingly globalized and homogenized society, humans are employing many old and new technologies aimed at exploiting what remains of the natural world to the maximum, all in order to increase our population and the comforts and conveniences of our modern lifestyle. But left out of the equation has been the welfare of the rest of life upon which we surely depend. The great majority of human activities today come at the expense of well-functioning, healthy, and balanced ecosystem. These activities are increasingly compounded with our increase in numbers and cast a pall over the future of life on Earth. We humans must question many generations-old traditions such as livestock production and eating habits that are inflicting serious and pervasive damage to the life community upon whose health and vitality we depend for both our present and future well-being. We should learn to eat lower on the food chain, such as by picking pinyon pine nuts, as has been done to provide nutritious staples to Native Americans for thousands of years. We must recognize that it has taken millions of years for life to become established on Earth, first in the seas and then upon land, and that this establishment is made possible by the interrelationships of many different living creatures.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And as Tammy comes forward, I want to apologize to Ken Jones, but you will be provide our final comments.
Good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. I'm Beaver County Commissioner Tammy Pearson from Utah. I'm owner of Pearson Ranch and a BLM grazing permit owner. I'm also a member of the SFW, the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and Daughters of the Pioneers. And I've served for 30 years as the district manager of the Twin M Conservation District. I've lived in southwest Utah my entire life. I've been active in agriculture, farming, hunting, livestock production on private, state, trust lands, and a BLM permit holder. I've had an agricultural education from Utah State University and the School of Hard Knocks for the last 40 years. As a permittee, I've seen the population explosion of the feral horse herds. I see the degradation of the rangeland in our desert when the horses exceed AML over 450% on average in our area. The riparian areas and springs are destroyed. My family's private property, our culture, our heritage, and our livelihoods are at risk. As an avid hunter and sportsman, I see habitat and water sources either destroyed or in a rapid decline due to the overgrazing caused by the overpopulation of feral horses in our area. The wildlife, the mule deer, antelope, sage-grouse, and elk are all suffering as a result of this damage caused by the overpopulation of horses. As district manager of the Twin M Conservation District, I am extremely concerned that this damage of our natural resources in this fragile desert range is so extensive that it is quite possibly beyond repair. Our district board is very aware of the damages and are looking for any avenue to improve these conditions. That's our job. As a citizen of Utah and the United States, I'm worried that the selfish interests of special interest groups far outweigh the impact on this natural resource. These groups do not understand on-the-ground management or the impact that overpopulation and overgrazing can do to an ecosystem, and frankly, I'm sure they do not care because it does not impact them personally. As a county commissioner, I am sworn to protect the health, safety, and welfare of my county and the citizens who live there. In a small rural county that is 87% federally managed land, our local families are very affected by the overpopulation and overgrazing that is occurring. It is and will continue to be an economic hardship on individual families who own BLM permits and continue to pay before the fact grazing fees on pastures that they are unable to utilize. My recommendation to this advisory board is to use common sense and practical solutions for permanent solutions. As a county commissioner, I pledge that we are going to do everything that we can on a congressional level to make bring them out on the ground, give them on-the-ground education, bring some actual awareness. I'm not sure that the word that we're trying to make, that the statements we're making, is getting to Congress. And so we are having a congressional horse tour a year from now in August, and it's going to be on the ground in Nevada and Utah, and I'm going to pledge that Utah does not end up like Nevada and their horse population. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Ramona Morrison representing Protect the Harvest. I don't want to, it's been a long day and we've heard a lot of comments, many of which I would like to reiterate, in particular those of Jake Tibbetts of Eureka County, as well as JJ Gogachia and several others. But I do want to touch on a couple things that we have not touched on. Protect the Harvest has been for a long time documenting some of the travesties that we have talked about today with regard to horses. And I just received a call yesterday from Eureka County, JJ talked about it, of a number of young horses dead in a spring as a result of choking down for lack of water. And this is going to continue. We have a problem in the West with regard to this one animal, in that it is the only unmanaged animal out there. Every other large animal, and even small animals from foxes on up to elk, are managed either by the Fish and Game or local game departments, or in the case of livestock, strictly managed by the regulating agencies, to the point, in my own family's case, where they show up at gunpoint on an allegation of overgrazing. So I think that what we have seen in the West, and in particular in Nevada, we are about a quarter of our permitted livestock numbers, roughly, because it's very hard to get accurate numbers out of the federal agencies, in terms of permitted livestock on these western rangelands in Nevada. However, it is the western rancher, and in particular in Nevada, who has the ownership of the vested water rights that are watering these horses. So the horses that are dying in springs are dying in somebody's water, and is being watered based upon the fact that the ranchers are maintaining those waters for their own livestock as well as for the horses. In the case of Ralston Valley, when our ranch was shut down in 1991, all of the water was turned off in that valley by virtue of shutting down that ranch. So this is the problem for the for the horses in terms of water, in that the water is really coming from the ranchers. One of the things that we hear quite often, whether you're in Congress or in a Nevada legislative hearing or in a public setting, is that the Western federal lands could not possibly be well managed if it weren't for the federal agencies being here managing these lands. And what we have today is the gross mismanagement of this one animal. In addition to that, we have everything from forests, where you drive from New Mexico to Montana to the Sierras of California through Utah, wherever you go, dead and dying forests, or if you drive from I-80 as I did up from Elko, from Reno to Nevada, you see cheatgrass as far as the eye can see. And so I think it's incumbent upon the federal agencies involved here to follow their own laws and manage the horses according to the laws as written by Congress, and remove horses to wherever they want to take them, to HML levels as set by Congress in 1971. Thank you, and we'll go from there.
My name is Kenneth Jones. I came in at 11 and signed up hoping I could catch you folks while you were fresh. I appreciate the opportunity to give you a synopsis of my interaction and association with the Wild Horse and Burro Act. After purchasing an interest in the Robinson Sorensen sheep and cattle operation in 1973 and selling our ranching property in southern Utah, my wife and I moved with our young children to Elko County in the spring of 1974. In 1982, we dissolved the Sorensen-Jones partnership and established our own livestock operation. Our share of the Sorensen-Jones partnership included a BLM permit for 13,437 AUMs on the spruce allotment. Our newly designated area of use was subsequently named the Valley Mountain Allotment. We sold our interest in the sheep to my brother-in-law, Von Sorensen, and began the process of converting our permit from sheep to cattle. In 1992, that conversion was completed. The BLM concluded that our allotment was better suited to sheep than cattle, so in that conversion, our permit was reduced from 13,437 down to 4,532 active AUMs. That reduction from 13,437 to 4,532 represented a cut of 66% and a loss of 8,905 AUMs. Those AUMs were fully purchased through substantial effort over the course of many years. They were not a gift from the U.S. government, as some people seem to think. One of the reasons for such a draconian cut in livestock numbers was that portions of 2 wild horse management areas were included within the boundaries of our Valley Mountain allotment, and there had to be sufficient forage reserved for the 285 head of horses that were determined to be the maximum appropriate management level for those 2 areas. In 1998, the BLM issued their final multiple use decision for our allotment, in which the numbers and management of cattle and horses were outlined. This past year, 2015-16, due mainly to rapidly increasing horse numbers, we voluntarily reduced our cattle usage from the permitted 4,532 AUMs to less than 3,000. At the same time, according to BLM census, there are currently approximately 1,800 to 2,000 horses present on these 2 HMAs that include our allotment. Those numbers are 700% above the levels determined by the BLM to be appropriate for those areas. Under the final multiple use decision, the BLM is mandated to maintain the horses within a range of plus or minus 15% of AML. Some areas of our allotment have become unusable for cattle because of excessive horse use. Some locations experience from 70 to 80% forage utilization by horses prior to the time that our cattle go out in the fall. It must be remembered that our livestock are only on the range for 6 months, mid-November to mid-May, each year. Are we out of time? Okay. Can I just make one closing statement here?
One, if it's very brief.
Okay. Simply following the growth of the wild horse herd will not solve this problem. Horse numbers have got to be reduced to the appropriate management level and then manage to maintain their numbers within those levels as spelled out in the Wild Horse and Burro Act.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jones. So, Fred, before I turn the microphone back over to you, and board members, please stay seated. But if you're in this part of the room, just stand up for a moment. Just for a moment. Oh, I know you want to. Come on. So, you've done an amazing job this afternoon. You really have, and I would like you to give yourselves a standing ovation. And we hope to see you back at 8 o'clock.